Senator Alex Antic, been great to speak with you recently on Flow. Good to be with you again.
Thanks, Ricky. Great to be here.
Now, last week when we spoke, we talked about the tech giants and social media and concerns about giants like Google, and there was a conversation back then about maybe Google should be replaced in Australia by the something like the ABC is funded, a government-funded search engine. Now there's a suggestion that's popped up that maybe the ABC should run a competitor to Facebook. What's going on there?
Well, it's a good question. What is going on there? It sounds like this is a bit of a thought bubble that's come out of a left-wing think tank, and let's hope that's where it stays, because we talked last week, as you say, about the problems with big tech, and it's good to see the left acknowledging those. We do have problems with censorship, and we've seen that recently with Craig Kelly, MP, getting his account completely turned off. He had a great following and a real way to get his message across. But the suggestion has been that the ABC, through publicly funded means, run its own social media platform in the form of Facebook. Now, that's the pitch. Immediately, it's a pretty simple answer from me. It's a great big no, and I'll tell you why. First of all, one of the problems we've got with the ABC at the moment, in my view, is this mission creep. We still don't really know in the modern era what the ABC is meant to do. Back when it was formed in the 30s, it was designed really as a sort of a way of conglomerating all of the various different radio stations. Now it's become this great big behemoth where it's doing internet and it's doing magazine-style shows and it's doing TV and it's doing radio, it's doing the internet. This is just another limb to that. And really, in my view, what would happen if the ABC started its own social media network would be we would just get another left-wing echo chamber in the form that we've already got in the form of Twitter and other such organisations. And except the only issue is this time the taxpayer would pay for it. So you and I would get the opportunity to pay for a service which no doubt flies in the face of the very values that people like you and I hold dear, and many of your listeners as well. So, look, this is another way that we can sort of try and stretch the bounds of the ABC. But for me, it's got to be nipped in the bud early. It's a no.
Yeah, I've been stretching my mind to think what they might call it, and it just occurred to me what they should call it. And like if it's competing with Facebook, it should be called groupthink.
Well, you might submit that one to the ABC and see how you go.
We'll see how we go. Now, part of the reason I imagine that people are pushing this idea that we need the ABC or a government intervention in the social media space is the concern about fake news. And you mentioned Craig Kelly's been kicked off of Facebook, and what is truth when it comes to online material. And we see the ABC itself has been caught out a couple of times recently spreading their own fake news.
Yeah, that's right. It's come up. I mean, if you went back through the annals of the last decade or more, you'd find any number of different examples, I presume. But there's a couple of recent ones in the last few weeks. The most obvious one, I think, was this business about the dancing at the naval ship launch the other day, and there were dancers there and whatever. The ABC ran some footage where they cut to a couple of the Defence Force chiefs supposedly looking shocked in the crowd. And then 24 hours later, they admitted, well, no, actually, they weren't there in the crowd at all, and they'd kind of just either used footage that had been given to them or, tacked it together to make it look in a different way.
Yeah, so the
We've
ABC,
seen that several times.
They made that look like it was a moment in Police Academy with Commandant Lestrade watching this bizarre occurrence. Turns out it never happened.
It never happened. And we've seen example after example of that. I think there was one a year or so ago with the Prime Minister talking to a person during the bushfires, and it made it look like there was a sort of an altercation when in actual fact the conversation kept going. So we've seen examples of this, and look, you have to ask yourself why. You have to ask yourself why it is we've got into a position where this organisation's editorialising and in this fashion. And I always say what we're seeing out of the ABC in 2021 is that organisation using your money to preach their politics. And my view is there's got to be a proper deep dive into this, and there's got to be a proper umpire so that people can complain. They can complain and there has some teeth, because the problem is not getting fixed at the moment.
There's a feeling, I think, amongst older listeners, older Australians, that the ABC was there for the regions, that it was there to represent people in the regions. How has it lost its anchor? How has it drifted so far to the political left?
It's a great question, and we know that when it commenced, it was really, as I said earlier, a way of kind of joining the dots on the various different radio stations, and they were regional, a lot of them. It was a way of connecting various parts of the country by radio. Since then, I think it's death by a thousand cuts in many ways. We've seen this drift into TV, drift into the internet. But I think the real issue has been, as that mission creep has increased, so has the hiring budget. And what we've seen, I think, in essence, is what they're calling now a staff-led collective, if you like. So if I'm a manager and I hold, particular political views, I'm more likely to hire, particularly given that it's not my money, someone who also shares those views. And I think what we're seeing now is this sort of almost unaccountable bureaucracy that's formed, which has meant that people are basically being paid to run their own vanity projects, their own political vanity projects. I mean, the ABC is the very home, in my view, of identity politics in this country. And by that, of course, your listeners would know, I mean that the process of breaking people up and using their identity as the key feature of what they do. So, I identify as somebody who is X, and therefore I am oppressed. Therefore, that must be my message. Now, that to me is has nothing about diversity. Whether you're an LGBTIQ person or whatever it is, it's actually about division. The ABC, in my view, is stoking division in this country, not unity.
Yeah, and I noticed that on that front, I've spoken with the listeners on the morning show earlier today about this identity politics topic, because the Prime Minister's been quoted by Latika Burke in Sydney Morning Herald speaking to an audience in Sydney, and he's spoken about this scourge of identity politics in Australia and how we need to move away from that topic. And one of the identity issues, I guess, that's been levelled at the PM, including from the ABC, is about his religious beliefs. What do you make of where the ABC is going with the commentary on the PM's religious beliefs, and does it really matter when it comes to public policy making?
Well, look, I mean, I think first of all, starting a step back, there's a broader conversation about where the community at large and some of the media organisations generally take religious views, particularly those of the Christian faith. I mean, I think you'll find that you would get a very different reaction from some of the media outlets for certain religions than you would with Christianity. And we saw that recently with the ABC around Easter time. Easter time, they ran a poll which asked the question about whether it's still current to believe in Jesus. They then followed that up, and by the way, this was on Good Friday, if you want to be particularly insensitive, and then followed it up, I think, a day later with another poll about whether or not people believe in ghosts. And the sort of, if you draw the lines, the implication was, is this a fantasy you believe in? Now, there is no way that would be done for any other religion. So I think you have to ask yourself, what is happening in society whereby people are being basically ridiculed for their religious beliefs? And we see that rolling out with the coverage of the Prime Minister in the last few days. It was almost pitched as though this was sort of a curiosity. Now, we know that at least half, if not slightly more, Australians identify as people who are Christians. We know that. It's about 52% as of 2016. So why it is that the ABC is seeking to ridicule people for their religious beliefs, particularly when they're pitching themselves as being identifying with this. So their charter requires them to represent the diversity of Australia. Well, half of Australia represents Christians. Now, that message is not getting across. My view is that there are two things. First of all, the ABC needs a good review, and it needs the ombudsman to be able to work these things out. But the real issue for me, Ricky, is that, as Plato said in 400 BC, when good men are indifferent to politics, bad men rule. My view is that people of solid values-based proposition, social conservatives, need to re-enter the fight of politics, and we need to reclaim things, all of our institutions, like the ABC, the schools, the universities, and that only comes when people get involved. So that's the real message here.
Yeah, and the ombudsman you're referencing there, what would the title or the role of that ombudsman be?
Well, we've got a telecommunications ombudsman at the moment, and that's the title. It's given authority under the Telecommunications Ombudsman Act or whatever it is. So it would be a public broadcasting ombudsman, and it wouldn't just necessarily, in my view, and I'm just sort of spitballing the issue if you like, but it would also cover the SBS and any other broadcasters that fit under that banner. And the idea would be, at the moment, if you make a complaint about the ABC, it basically goes into a pile. They receive, according to their annual report, something in the order of 3,500 complaints per annum. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot of times the phone rings every year. Most of them relate to bias. They break it up into political bias and general bias, but it's a large chunk of that. The real issue is, even though there are rights to then escalate that if you don't get a response you like to the media authority, ACMA, it very much ends normally in nothing happening. The reason for that is what we need is a proper, independent, accountable body that has no tie back to the organisation, that simply is able to make a decision based on the merits. Now, it's like having a teacher at the front of the class. And if you have a teacher at the front of the class, the students are less likely to play up in my intimation. So it's one plank. The reality is we haven't had a proper, I'll say the word, deep dive into the running of the organisation since about 1983. There was one in 1997, and there have been little bits on the way through, but there hasn't really been a proper root and branch review of what this organisation does, what it really needs, what it's there for, and is it servicing Australians and mainstream Australians and people particularly that pay the bills. And I think that's really where we need to start.
Yeah, that's an interesting proposal. We'll track that with interest, particularly because the PM's laid the groundwork overnight about talking about identity politics and who might be the propagators of that in Australia. So maybe the ground is right to have that sort of review. So we'll track that with interest. Thank you, Senator Antic, for your time talking with us today.
Thanks again, Ricky.